when you have that team surrounding the child and guarding and protecting their treatment gains, that's when you have the best opportunity for success. So I think a parent just needs to stop thinking that the answer is out there on some website, in some professional's office. It's out there in a medication, in a pill that my child is going to take. It just doesn't work that way, especially if your child has some powerful needs. Start looking at it as a team that you can step up and take responsibility for coaching and quarterbacking that team.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this podcast today. I'm especially excited because we have one of my best friends here on the set, and he's someone I've looked up to for a long time, and he's got some unique characteristics. I see him as a rare individual that's an influencer. He's a thought leader in the space, and it's almost like anything he says, I want to have my notebook ready. So I don't know if that's putting a lot of pressure on you, Tony, but I expect that there's going to be some really wonderful things shared today in this podcast. Tony is a past president of the NATSAP organization, which is the National Association for Therapeutic Schools and Programs. He's a co-founder in multiple adolescent treatment programs. And he's got a lot of other experiences inside the field that make him a perfect guest to kick off this season of the Not By Chance podcast, specifically with a professional in the field. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Tony Moshier. So Tony, thank you for joining us today on this podcast.
I'm happy to be here, yeah.
As we were driving down, Tony, coming to film this today, Roxanne said, I think you ought to make sure there's something kind of fun and interesting. And my thoughts immediately went to, I don't know what year it was, but I just introduced you as this thought leader, and all of that's true. But what I didn't say is you're a fun guy. I remember, I don't know if you were the president of NATSAP at the time or just one of us regular people at NATSAP. But we were having a lot of fun. It felt a little bit, there was such a camaraderie there with each other, and years of being around each other and time together. Just the collegiality, the friendship. And I remember some practical jokes.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
that we did. So I guess I don't mind the audience knowing that we're real people. We've had some fun. We didn't toilet paper anybody's house or anything like that, like an adolescent, but we had a lot of fun.
Yeah, we did. We work hard when we get together. We got to blow off a little steam, right?
That's true. Well, Tony, one of the first questions I wanted to kind of jump into, it happens to be an area that I've spent a lot of the focus of my career on, and that is sort of the transitional period, when that teen is getting closer to going home after a lot of the work has happened and they're wrapping up and all of that. I just want to give you kudos because, the work that I was doing was like focused only on that and then post-discharge. And I was really trying to get the word out about the importance of this part and to want to do it. There were a lot of programs doing something, I think, at the time, but it was mostly maybe some check-in calls, things like that. But for whatever reason, you really were the first to embrace a more intensive approach to supporting the gains made in treatment. And I don't think it was easy to do, but you did it. And I would like you to kind of go back in time, if you would, and if you can remember your thought process and what made that a priority for you to implement something that was not easy and was not well recognized yet.
Well, early in my career, I was a therapist at a youth program, and you have a really high caseload. I was dealing at any given time with 12 to 15 students on my caseload, and that's a lot, right? And these kids would come in, you join with them, you try to get to know them, you try to do good treatment, and then the moment that they leave, there's all of a sudden a new kid coming in the door on your caseload. And it's so easy as a mental health provider to be out of sight, out of mind. You just don't have bandwidth to track these families. And again, early in my career, I noticed that, some families went home and did great. Other families, you'd get that call, 30 days later or 2 months later, and the kid had just gone off the rails. And he was back to doing what he had done just prior to coming to treatment. So I really puzzled about that. And there's nothing like that to kind of take the wind out of your sails and make you question, am I even doing anything here? Like, it's really disheartening. It's devastating for the family, difficult for morale for the program and for me. So I became really interested in what's happening when a child goes from an inpatient setting or a residential treatment setting, or even a PHP IOP setting, and then going to just back home to regular life. And that's when I became really interested in aftercare. And around that time, just really wanting to increase our outcomes, that's when I ran into you. And, you know, where my job ended, your job started. And then I realized that really in good treatment, my job shouldn't end on the day of discharge. It should continue on. And that's kind of was the beginnings of my aftercare journey.
Did you ever have, Tony, that feeling, the metaphor that came to me when I was launching that focus, that organization? Before that, I was in a wilderness treatment program as a therapist, and I had the feeling it was sort of this playing hot potato with the teen sort of experience. Like, we would hold the teen for a while, toss the hot potato to the next program, and sort of we let go, they have it. And then when treatment ended, it was sort of another toss to some maybe unsuspecting, unfamiliar outpatient therapist in their local area.
Yeah.
And that there was a disconnect. And the transition planning seemed to be, at least way back then, in my eyes, it was sort of a checkbox.
Absolutely. Yeah, you'd be lucky if you were able to talk to the therapist that the child was returning home to even one time prior to the last day of treatment. You were lucky, and typically you didn't talk to them at all. So you had this outpatient therapist back home in the child's state who suddenly inherits this child. They have no idea the experience they've been through. They know nothing about residential treatment. They know nothing about the journey that this family has been on. And then you expect them to come in and kind of gracefully receive the baton and not fumble it.
Right.
It's a tall order.
Yeah. And we kind of followed that pattern as if it was the complete process.
Yeah.
And luckily, over time, I think there's been a lot of innovation, in the field. Another thing I want you to kind of keep in the back of your mind as we talk today, I think you have a perspective over, how long have you been?
25 years.
25 years, so a good amount of time, both as a therapist and was it marriage and family therapy? Or?
I'm a marriage and family therapist by training, and like many of us that started programs, I'm a therapist who then tried to learn how to run a business. So I founded Telos in 2004, and since then it's grown and expanded, so that's what I do.
So then the Telos, and then take us through kind of what were some of the other things that came after Telos?
After Telos, well, I'm still there.
That plus in addition to Telos, because I think that's the story.
One of the things that I did in 2020 was I co-founded a charity called Choose Mental Health, and that's dedicated to just raising awareness about inpatient treatment, really all things mental health. It's also dedicated to raising funds. What I was seeing is good quality long-term mental health services were available to families that were affluent or had amazing insurance, but the middle 80% of families, they had insurance that would pay for a very short length of stay or nothing. And so, again, the highest income families were able to afford really good treatment. The lowest income families always had state aid, but in middle America, their children were just really struggling. So this charity was dedicated to raising awareness and raising funds for those families.
And then after that, just in the more recent times, I think you've also established a shorter term treatment program, right? Or a couple of them. Yeah,
and that's something new. We've always been longer term, meaning a child comes to us and they're there living with us for 8 to 10 to 12 months. But we also know that that's not the reality for most families. So about a year ago, we started a short-term residential program. When I say short-term, I mean 30 to 60 to 90 days. It's a little more clinically intensive, but young people come and they can have residential treatment in that shorter period of time. And then what happens is when their insurance typically runs out, then they go home. That is a good thing because these families get help where maybe they wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah.
But it also has its challenges because a child who comes to 90 days of residential treatment, they tend to go home a little bit undercooked, right? We just haven't had enough time with them to get them where we want them to be. Because keep in mind, when we have it our way to do a full, thorough treatment process for a young person who's really struggling, we're talking about really acute clinical needs, complex kids. It takes them 16 years to get there. So you need more than 30 days to be able to undo that and help them develop new skills. So it's a challenge.
That's a really interesting dilemma. You going from a residential where you had the time, the resources to kind of take the time to give them all kinds of experiences, and let them mature, let the new things sink in, let them establish relationships with your staff, have them grapple with the concepts over time, to this short term where possibly insurance could run out in 30 days, and maybe by surprise.
Yes. Yeah, they don't give you much notice. A family will be going along, will be 2, 3, 4 weeks into treatment. That child is just starting to soften up, and we call them armored marshmallows, right? They're soft on the inside, but they got some armor and defenses. They're just starting to let that armor down, and then all of a sudden the insurance company says, nope, they no longer meet medical necessity. We're denying care, and then that child has to pack up and go home. And sometimes you get 2 days notice.
That's tough.
It's tough.
And so you've got the perspective of the mom and dad at home, the parents, and what's that like for them, but also what did you have to change, in your mentality? What was the evolution for you? Someone that wants so deeply to see real change happen so that it can last into the future, and the family work that I know you guys did.
Yeah.
Having that paradigm, and then the necessity of evolving for those who needed something, and you're there to help them. But what did you have to change?
Well, the first thing I had to change was my attitude about short-term residential, because I spent most of my career just really with a bad attitude about it, just feeling like, it's just not as effective as long-term. The attitude change I had was, you play the hand you're dealt. And in an ideal world, all of these families have resources that they could do long-term residential. But the reality is that 8 or 9 out of 10 don't. And so you make lemonade of lemons, right? The second thing we changed is our expectations of where the finish line is. So in a long-term residential process, if you have 10 to 12 months with a young person, you're going to do a major overhaul. You're going to kind of carve the tree with a chainsaw, and then you're able to get a file, and you're able to kind of shape things till they're ready. They're truly ready. And then when they go home, you kind of build that aftercare. Well, with a short-term process, you need to kind of rework your expectations and just know that we're going to work on skill building. We're going to identify what are just the couple of skills that if they can get these 1 or 2 things down, it's going to make a difference in their life. And then you do a clinical, intense work on just those couple of things without trying to do a lot of polishing, right? And then the third thing that you do is from day one, when you're working in a short-term setting, from day one, you're immediately thinking about aftercare. You don't have the luxury of saying, well, let's start thinking about what this next step's going to look like when they've been here 3 or 4 or 5 months. On day one, you have to say, what's going to happen? What are we going to do if the insurance denies tomorrow? What if we get 2 weeks? What if we only get 45 days? And so you're having those conversations with parents and with the next treatment provider immediately.
Awesome, Tony. So what I got from that, and I think this is a powerful series of principles that you're teaching here, Tony. One is that, work with the hand you've been dealt.
Yeah.
It's sort of create the right expectations with whatever you have. And you think about that, that's one of the lessons we're trying to help young people address as well. What it does is takes you out of kind of a victim mentality to, okay, yes, I would love to have more of the ideal, but I don't. So how do I make the most of this? And you've given another really good point, which is you can't do it all, so take a couple things deep, deep
Right.
as you can with those couple things, because what happens when a student in a program can make some deeper change in just fewer areas? What's your opportunity there?
Yeah. Well, we like to say we're clinically sophisticated. And I think it was Aristotle, don't quote me on the ancient philosopher who said this, but the ultimate form of sophistication is simplicity. That's the quote. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes in a treatment process, you're like, we have 10 or 15 things that need to happen with this child. So what we do in our treatment setting is we identify what we call the big ticket issues. And those big ticket issues are, what are the hills we want to die on?
Yeah.
Maybe we're not so concerned about helping the child stop swearing. Maybe we're not so concerned about, dealing with their oppositionality or their lack of attention. Maybe we just need to focus on the one or two or three things that are going to help them stay alive, right? Emotional regulation. What do I do when I have suicidal ideation? How do I stop my self-harm, right? That's how you get down to those couple of things. And then you have to figure out, how do we not just sit in a therapy office and talk around this and explore it? You have to get right down to the business of building skills and helping that child practice the skill, buy into the skill, and become proficient in it.
I love that. I hope there are a lot of parents out there who hear this, who recognize the third point you said, because if that's what's going on in short-term treatment, and you're also thinking about the final point you mentioned was aftercare. In the longer-term programs, another difference, I think, is that parents would be able to take a vacation. They could kind of emotionally let down, just sort of know that their child's safe.
Yeah.
And be able to decompress and take some time, and maybe 2 or 3 months, just sort of glide a little bit. But there's not that time in this case. And again, play the hand you're dealt, right? So if you have a short-term scenario, you have to almost plan on, it could be 30 days, right?
Yeah, you're right.
So if that's the case, if you're speaking to the parent, what would you say if you as a program are thinking we need to think aftercare right away? What would you suggest for the parents?
Well, one thing worth mentioning is there is such a thing as, I think, kind of predatory short-term inpatient models. There are companies out there. It's big business. They saturate the internet with big promises. And they essentially kind of lead parents to believe that, hey, send your child to us. We'll take what we can from the insurance company. And they promise the moon and stars. And then they're unable to deliver, which leaves the child feeling worse than they did before.
Like a failure.
Yeah, leaves the family feeling hopeless because they think they just got this state-of-the-art, here's the ultimate solution, and we failed yet again. So one of the things I really try to do with families I work with is help them manage their expectations that listen, we're not trying to change everything. We're just trying to take a trajectory that's been going down month after month and just change it, 5 degrees so that now they're getting a little better month after month. And so that's, if you can change those expectations, and then that makes all the difference, right? Emotionally for a parent. But, for families, I think they just need to understand that there is no magic bullet. There is no one thing that works for every child, every time, in every circumstance. And they also need to know that there's no treatment setting anywhere. Just like there's no medication that's going to magically make everything go away. This child's going to come home and he's still going to struggle, right? They'll still struggle with some of those issues. And so as a parent, you're learning how to prepare for that, right? Get the respite that you need if you can, and then prepare for that next step.
Parents, since college, my passion has been to help families thrive. For decades after, my team and I delivered the premier in-home aftercare, but it could be costly, and too many families were left without support. That's why we created Trusty, a unique blend of proven curriculum, personalized coaching, and intuitive technology. Starting at just $129 a month, you can access tools and expertise to get and keep your family on track at a fraction of what we used to have to charge. Like we always say, help things go right before they can go wrong. Visit trusty.com, spelled with 2 Y's, to learn more and subscribe today. When I think about, the parent's perspective, how do they, emotionally rest?
Yeah.
Even though they don't have a lot of time.
Right.
I think what you said is actually really, really important. I remember when we started working with families after treatment and we started to see these phases of transition. I think before we came along, there wasn't a real understanding or maybe communication of what we started to call the phases of transition.
Yeah.
That to let them know that it wasn't going to be fixed and that there was still work to do afterwards almost seemed like a little bit of a new piece of information. But in our minds, and exactly what you're saying here, is that having good expectations and understanding that it's not going to be all dessert. There's going to be some vegetables that you don't really like at the end of treatment, and that's okay. Yeah. And in fact, you're right on track if that's what's going on, because that's everybody is going to have that, right?
Yeah, but there's some really compelling research that I've been diving into, and I've been looking at what are the indicators of long-term positive change in a child who's gone through a treatment process. In other words, what works and why does it work? Mm-hmm. And for the longest time, it was the relationship the child had with the clinician. But there is actually one other indicator that has now surpassed that, and that is when a child comes to an inpatient setting and goes through a process, the families that have the best outcomes years down the road are the ones where the parents are the ones that say, I don't know if my child is going to drink from the nutrition that this program has for them. They may not buy in, and I can't control that. But I, as a parent, am going to go through a parallel process. I am going to drink from the nutrition, and I'm going to look inward and start doing that work on myself as a parent. I don't know if my child will evolve, but I'm going to evolve. Mm-hmm. Parents that do that have better outcomes for their child at the 1 year and 3 year and 5 year post-treatment. So it's huge.
That's awesome. And what you're pointing out too is the principle of focus on yourself.
Yeah.
And that's really where your real influence is anyway. So I see that as the way to actually emotionally recover, because parents up until this point have been trying to influence them, trying to get them to change and beating their head against the wall, not making a lot of progress, and ultimately seeing the spiral down. And so their mental health is really low as well. So your point about the parent, doing the work themselves that they need to change is, it's actually kind of been in the research for a long time, in the sense that if a teen is going home to a stable, well-structured, emotionally calm, connected environment, those variables have been out there for a long time. Yeah. And what you're saying is that the parent who is doing the work creates that kind of environment.
Yeah. I'm a believer that one good session with the parents is worth 5 to 10 good sessions with the child when it comes to long-term change. Mm-hmm. There's nothing more soul-crushing than trying to control something that you have no control over.
Absolutely.
And these parents have spent years trying to control what their child is doing. And at the end of the day, they really don't have control over that. What they do have control over is how they react and the process they engage in. And so when you make that shift, it starts to unlock something magic, and everything starts to get better, right? And then that child comes home to parents that are more, they just have better resources. They're more adept at understanding that child and creating an environment that invites that child to be healthy.
You know, that parent goes from really parenting from a place of fear
Yeah.
to one of more calm
Yeah.
confidence.
Yep.
And that creates a completely different environment
Yep.
and a completely different outcome for the teen as they make decisions. You think about, you know, some of the things the parent needs to do afterwards. They're sort of taking the baton back, so to speak, and they got to advance that further. They are, if they've been training and they can do their leg of the race, they're basically nurturing the relationship while still creating the proper expectations. And recently, Tony, I've had this kind of paradigm shift, and we kind of kicked off the beginning of Trusty the other night with a webinar, but the title was really around the idea that transition planning often fails because it could be the checkbox,
Right.
and it could be started way too late,
Right.
and it could be just under duress, and at that point, if it's left to that, you end up with a plan, especially the expectations that are owned by the parent, and the process is really driven by the parent or the therapist, and the child is sort of, you know, ultimately going to agree to it.
Right.
They may push back and they might try to negotiate a little bit. They might try to get some of what they want before they have to go home.
Yeah.
But in the end, who owns the plan? It's the
Yeah.
parents.
Yeah.
And this has been a huge shift in my mind because I've personally had the opportunity to work with teens and start with them and say, you want these freedoms? You want these privileges when you get home, but do you understand the concerns that your parents have? Do you understand what got you here? You know, is your therapy process, has it got you to the point where you have the wisdom that you can wisely look at that and say, for my parents to want to give me that kind of freedom, I'm going to need to address these concerns in a way that builds trust.
Yeah.
And that it would make sense for a parent to say, yes, I agree with you. So that's the change.
So let me talk a little bit about home contracts.
Yeah.
Years and years and years ago, and we may have even got this term from some of your material, we started working with what is commonly called a home contract, meaning a child's getting ready to go home. So you sit down, and we call them the BECs, which is boundaries, expectations, and consequences. All right, Billy, you know, here are the boundaries, the do's and don'ts. This is what we expect, and if you violate those boundaries or don't live up to these expectations, then these are what the consequences are. So this is just kind of the foundation of a good structured home, right? Where a child knows where the limits are, knows where the guardrails are, and knows what's going to happen if they step over those limits. The problem is it fails. It often fails because that home contract is created in kind of an artificial environment. This child's living in a program where all those boundaries, expectations, and consequences are near and clear and well practiced by professionals who do that for a living. And then all of a sudden, overnight, that child goes from that artificial environment, kind of that padded world, and now they're at home. And now it's the parents that are the ones that have to figure out, how do we become the expertly trained staff that are you know, reinforcing and following these BECs, boundaries, expectations, and consequences. And so often it kind of falls apart at that point. So without, I think what's interesting that you're doing, Tim, is this app that you mentioned as you taught me about it. It's going to be interesting to see as this rolls out and gains popularity that perhaps this is a way to take the home contract, the boundaries, expectations, and consequences, and it operationalizes it, right? And it kind of gives the parents a little more of a skeletal structure that they can kind of flesh the bones out rather than just trying to have to do everything on their own. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is. It's been interesting, the evolution of this whole concept. Yeah, it was home contracts and all of that. Literally, teens would be asked to sign it at the end.
Yep.
And it was this. It was actually very misleading to everyone involved, because to the parent, they were thinking, all right, we put that out in writing. It's very clear, and Junior signed it. So when he gets home, I can hold up the paper and say, look, what you signed, that should give me influence. And so it led them astray, making them think that I'm comfortable, I'm confident because we've got it on paper and he signed it.
No child says, oh, Dad, you're right. That is my signature. It looked like I breached the contract.
Right.
We need to negotiate a resolution.
Exactly. We are taking this legal thing that we think has power and has zero power. We started calling it a plan for moving forward in the past, but it was still being designed, by the parents or the therapist, kind of helping that happen. And so it was a good step, a great step. But I think the next one is where basically the teen starts with, what do I want my life to be like in 6 months from now?
Right.
How do I envision myself now that I have kind of cleared the cobwebs? I can imagine a positive future. I can, I've had different interactions with my parents now that go against the old patterns. What can I see for myself now?
Yeah.
And start with that vision, and then say, okay, what's a short-term win?
Right.
What's that first step?
Right.
That you could create a plan that you could present to your parents to say, this is what I'd like to be in 6 months, and I understand I can't get there right away, but here's something I'd like to present to you as what I'm willing to do to show you that I am ready, I'm mature enough, I can take enough responsibility to have this freedom or privilege. Because I've kind of been without a lot of that while I'm in treatment.
Yeah.
And I know I can't have it back all at once. So here's my plan. And that way, the ownership, the authorship, like you think about, multiple people authoring a journal article, let's say. They're the first author in this case. And it doesn't mean the parents can't edit that and provide feedback. But then it's ultimately, the way I thought about it is, I love going back to the farm in my mind. You're a metaphor guy. That's why I love to talk to you, because I can picture everything, because you help me understand it in metaphors. What happens when you have, a new field and you put the sheep in the field? It's funny, it can be full of grass, but they find themselves next to the fence. Mm-hmm. And they work their way around the fence. And they're actually looking for what's on the other side of the fence, and they're wanting on the other side. The grass is always greener, and if they find a hole, they will take that, and they have a full field of tall, belly deep hay, or grass, and where they've got a gate somewhere, and so what I could see this process doing is actually getting the teen to realize those holes they used to take weren't good for them. It didn't increase trust. It didn't help them feel better.
Right.
It didn't really get them where they wanted to go. But there is a gate.
Right.
And if they could create a plan that would move them through the gate, their parents can then say, that's exactly what I want.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so interesting, talking about the concept of trust. I've spent decades now working with young people, and what I've learned over and over and over again is trust is like a plant, right? And it takes a long time to grow. but it can be cut down in 10 seconds
Yeah.
with one swing of the axe, right? It's
Right.
cut down. And when that trust is gone, the parents say, I want to see that plant grow again, and it's going to take time. But if you're a good red-blooded American teenager, you want a payday advance loan.
Right.
You say, you know what? Please give me credit for time that I will work. Trust me now. Okay, I've stopped using. It's been 5 days since I've used substances. So why is it that you don't trust me?
Yeah.
Why is it that the plant isn't there? So give me my payday advance loan, right? And I promise I'll pay it back. Give me all the trust right now, and you won't be sorry. And so then what happens is typically parents say no. And the child says, you don't trust me. You'll never trust me. You've never trusted me. So the child loses hope. The parents get frustrated. Because the child's lost hope, they think, well, I might as well just act out, right? Well, I'm never going to get trust from my parents, so why not just use again? Which then confirms to the parents that they weren't worthy of that trust in the first place.
Right.
And as a result, the plant never grows. The minute it starts to bud, somebody comes in and snips it off again. So, yeah, it's exciting to see a way to help families potentially. I've found over and over again, young people, they want the plan. Just like you said, they want a plan. Young people usually can live with the fact that there's a deficit of trust as long as they can see a really clear path. Like they can see the path, they can see the milestones, and they know exactly what they need to do in order to get back to the top of the ladder.
Yeah.
And when they can see that, they can accept that. But if they don't see the path and trust is just this amorphous idea, well, we'll let you know when we trust you again.
Yeah.
We need to see you living your life in the right way for long enough. Well, these kids, they think in 30-minute increments, So
You're pointing out a weakness for us parents, definitely, is that we haven't created clarity in how can you get to a place where that trust is there and have a clear path that they can visualize in their mind, and because we haven't. And we're just saying, I don't feel it yet.
Yeah.
And so how do they get there? It's like this, they're in a dark room and they don't know how to find the door. So yeah, that's really interesting, the metaphor you've used, Tony. As we wrap up here, Tony, I don't want to wrap up, by the way.
We could talk forever.
This has just been amazing. As we've talked today, is there anything that's come to your mind that you think our parents out there or other treatment professionals? Actually, let me ask you one more specific question. I'm thinking about other treatment professionals out there, and other programs. With this kind of evolution in your mind and the way you've thought about short-term residential treatment, insurance-based with maybe a sudden discharge that could be around the corner, and the adjustments you've made, what have you tried to do, because the family has been really important in that equation, as you've mentioned. What have you tried to do to kind of address that with the limitations that you have of time and resources in that scenario to help the family side of this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just such a huge advocate for levels of care. And instead of thinking of it as different silos, well, here's a residential treatment program, and here's a PHP, and here's an IOP, and here's an outpatient therapist, and here's the doctor over here, and here's the school professionals, and here's the clergy. And they're all in their own silos and disconnected from each other. I'm just such a huge advocate in a parent learning how to reach their arms around and pull those people together to create a home team. And a parent stepping up and saying, I'm going to take responsibility to assemble the team, and then I'm going to be the quarterback, right? So when the ball is snapped to me, I'm going to call the play, so that, all right, when academics starts to wobble, then we need the academic specialist to come in, and I'm going to call the play there. And then we know that the clergy is going to do this, and we know that the home therapist is going to be aware of this, and they're going to attack it from this angle. And when you have that team surrounding the child and guarding and protecting their treatment gains, that's when you have the best opportunity for success. So I think a parent just needs to stop thinking that the answer is out there on some website. It's out there in some professional's office. It's out there in a medication and a pill that my child is going to take. And stop thinking that the solution is going to be one intervention. If we can just do this DBT program for the next 90 days, problem solved. It just doesn't work that way, especially if your child has some powerful needs. Start looking at it as a team that you can step up and take responsibility for coaching and quarterbacking that team. Then the prognosis, the chances that your child is going to do better is they go through the roof, right? Especially if you can say, not only am I quarterbacking it for my child, but I'm going to learn and grow along the way as well. I'm going to take responsibility to do my work. There's a lot of parents out there. And I don't think parents, mess up their kids and that's why their kids struggle. I think that by and large, everybody's doing a pretty good job with the resources they have. They're doing the best they can. But everyone can do better. And there are a lot of parents out there that have not done their own work. And because they haven't done their own work, or maybe they're parenting the way they were parented and it was ineffective or reactive, they're struggling with being effective. Doing the work on yourself, it transforms you, and you have control over it, right? You have control over the work you do. The ultimate benefactor then is your child, which even the studies are reinforcing that.
Tony, that's probably as good a ending as we could have with you. Giving parents real hope, because it is within their control, their hands, and the way you describe the home team of putting these people in position, understanding how each could play a role, and so it's not another 30 days that's going to fix it, because it's just not going to be. And even if they had another 30 days, they'd benefit greatly from the support network you're talking about. And so I think that's a fantastic principle to leave everybody with, that it's so empowering to know that you can influence yourself, you can become better at this yourself. I'd like parents to just think about something in their life that they had maybe a weakness in the past, something they weren't very good at in the past. And that could be a skill, it could be a characteristic, it could be a job that you've done in the past where you didn't know what you're doing at first. And then as you focused on that, and as you learned about that role or that skill, and you started to apply it, you'd begin to feel the confidence that comes with that. And again, with the confidence, the fear goes away. And you're able to then perform at your best. So thank you, Tony, for that wisdom. Honestly, can we book you maybe we should join our podcast together. This has been really
one
fun.
Big podcast,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. So thank you for being on today. Tony, how can everybody find more podcasts like this that you're hosting?
Yeah, we have our own podcast. It's not as good as this one, but we try hard. It's called Ultimate Potential, a mental health podcast, and you can find it on Spotify and Apple.
Great. Yeah. Awesome. And his programs, Telos, and the other names of your other programs?
You can find everything at telos.org. That's where everything is. If you want to learn more about the charity, it's choosementalhealth.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tony.
You bet.